so precisely. I am shaped a lot by the history of Virginia. This is a command flag from George Washington. This flew in front of his command post at Valley Forge. Some of you know I've written a novel on Valley Forge, and before that wrote a novel called The Fragment Soldier, crossing the Delaware on Christmas Day in 1776. There's a new novel that will come out next year on Yorktown. So we sort of captured Washington's wartime experiences. It's important to remember, the Constitutional Convention that wrote the Constitution of the United States was presided over by a man who spent 8 years in the field as commander-in-chief. So when they wrote in, the president will be commander-in-chief, they knew precisely what they meant. This is the person responsible for defending the United States of America. It's a singular job. It's a job that Barack Obama doesn't have a clue about, but it's a singular responsibility. And that's one of the reasons I've spoken out about reforming the judicial branch and the disaster of the Boumediene decision, in which the courts have now interposed themselves on the battlefield to define combatant rights in a way that has never before been done in American history. And for the courts to take on themselves the responsibility for the security of the United States is a fundamental violation of the Constitution and a complete repudiation of the history of George Washington and the experience of the United States. And so I think we have to take very seriously protecting our country. And these are perilous times. Nobody here should be confused about this. You have inherited from your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents the most extraordinary system of government in history. And the fact is, it could be lost in a generation. I believe the election next year is the most important election of our lifetime, maybe the most important election in 150 years. I think 8 years of Barack Obama will lead us down a road that will take a very long time to come back from if we ever do. This is a Saul Alinsky radical seeking to create in the United States a European secular socialist bureaucratic system. He has been killing jobs because everything he believes in kills jobs. Too much red tape, too much regulation, too much litigation, too many taxes, and a psychological attitude that is the opposite of the American tradition. Reagan used to tell a story that in Great Britain, a working man who was standing by the side of the road, a Rolls Royce would go by, he would say to his son or daughter, someday we'll get them out of that car. In America, a working man standing by the side of the road, his son or daughter, Cadillac would go by, he'd say, someday you can buy that car. Obama has a European radical attitude towards class warfare, which is crippling this country. And is fundamentally wrong. Now, I'll just say one or two brief things. I'm going to toss it over to questions. But I want to say two core things about this campaign. And by the way, I want to thank you for supporting the Republican Party of Virginia, because the fact is I first got active in Georgia in 1960, when the entire state party was about the size of this room. So I'm a big believer in parties. Political parties enable middle-class people to run for office, which otherwise would be only available to rich people. So political parties really matter. Political parties create institutional members, so they stand for something. They can't be purely opportunistic because they exist over time. And I think it's wonderful that all of you, just a few days before Christmas, would come out here. But I want to say two quick things. One, I will not ask any of you to be for me. Because if you're for me, you're going to vote, go home and say, I sure hope it didn't fix it. That's not possible. No one person, even the president, can fix this country. What I will do is ask you to be with me for the next 8 years. To agree to stand side by side. To agree to remind the Congress, the governor, the legislature, the city council, the school board, the county commission, where we're going. But also to be with me side by side because we're going to make mistakes. You can't have this scale of change and do it all right. And so we need a feedback mechanism where you say, didn't quite get it, or not quite working, or the situation has changed, or here's a new, better idea. Finally, I want you to be with me because if we do what the governor and I both believe in, if we implement the 10th Amendment and we shrink Governor Washington, you have to grow citizenship back home because you have to fill the vacuum. So I will ask you to consider being with me. If you help me, and I was delighted poll came out yesterday that I'm ahead in Virginia, and I think that with your help I will get further ahead pretty rapidly. I think there's a choice becomes clear between the moderate and conservative candidate. This is a state where I'm pretty comfortable about what happens in that kind of choice. But if I become your nominee, because I think this election is so important, I think the difference between the best food stamp president in American history and a paycheck candidate is so big. The gap between being weak and confused about foreign policy and a candidate who's the longest serving teacher in the senior military, 23 years teaching 1- and 2-star generals and admirals. A candidate who has run up the biggest deficit in American history, and a candidate who balanced the budget for 4 straight years. A candidate who wants to have more entitlements for more redistribution through more class warfare, and a candidate who passed the first entitlement reform welfare. 2 out of 3 people went back to work or went to school. I think the gap is going to be so big that with your help, if I become the nominee, I will challenge the president to 7 3-hour debates in the Lincoln-Douglas tradition with a timekeeper but no moderator. I will concede in advance that he can use a teleprompter. It must be fair. If you were going to try to defend Obamacare, wouldn't you want the teleprompter? Now, a lot of people say, well, he'll never do it. I'm going to give you 3 reasons he'll do it. First, he announced in February of 2007 in Springfield, quoting Lincoln. Second, pure ego. Graduate of Columbia University, graduate of Harvard Law School, editor of the Harvard Law Review, best orator in the Democratic Party. How does he look in a mirror and say he's afraid to debate some guy who taught at West Georgia College? But there's a third practical reason. As many of you know, I study history, and unlike the president, I studied American history. Particularly the strong line in Virginia, by the way, where Joseph and I spent last Saturday at Mount Vernon, and there's more living American history in the state than any place else in America. So, I know how the Lincoln-Douglas debate came about. Abraham Lincoln, out of office for 10 years, 1 term in the U.S. House, several terms of state legislature, announces against the most popular, best-known U.S. senator and probable next president, and says, there are 105 days left in the campaign, let's debate every day. Douglas says, no, not going to do it. So Lincoln adopts a strategy that wherever Douglas speaks, Lincoln will show up the next day and answer it. And in about 2 or 3 weeks, it becomes the obvious to Douglas that the press coverage was Lincoln's answer to Douglas. And so he writes in and says, all right, I'll agree to the debates. There are 9 congressional districts. You've already followed me in 2 of them. I'm not going to go back. But I will debate you in the other 7. Those 7 debates were covered in detail by every newspaper in the country. And Lincoln then arranged for them to be published as a book, and they were a major part of how he got to be president. So if you help me and I become your nominee in Tampa during my acceptance speech, the president has not yet accepted the 7 debates. I will announce that as of that evening, my scheduler is the White House. And wherever he goes, I will show up 4 hours later.